On July 10, 2024, a seemingly ordinary day began in the vast agricultural expanse of California. But beneath the surface of golden fields and sun-drenched valleys, California's agricultural heartland was about to become the center of a heated national controversy, a storm brewing on the horizon. As the sun climbed higher, federal agents descended upon several cannabis farms, launching coordinated raids that would send shockwaves through the community. The initial focus of the operation was reportedly targeting undocumented workers, individuals who form a crucial part of the state's agricultural workforce. However, the situation on the ground quickly spiraled out of control, escalating beyond the scope of a routine enforcement action. The clash between law enforcement and a community of workers, many of whom felt unjustly targeted, began to intensify, creating a tense and volatile atmosphere. Local residents and activists, witnessing what they perceived as an overreach of power, joined the fray, adding their voices to the growing chorus of dissent. The unfolding events quickly drew national attention, not for the arrests themselves, but for the increasingly aggressive tactics employed by law enforcement officials. Chemical agents, including tear gas, were deployed against a crowd that had gathered to protest the raids, further inflaming tensions. Shockingly, the crowd included children, families caught in the crossfire of a rapidly escalating conflict. The use of chemical agents on a crowd containing children ignited widespread outrage and immediate calls for a thorough investigation into the conduct of the federal agents involved. This incident starkly exposed the ongoing friction and deep-seated policy differences between California's progressive stance on cannabis legalization and its sanctuary policies, designed to protect undocumented immigrants, and the unwavering federal enforcement priorities, which often clash with these state-level initiatives. The events of that day forced a reckoning, prompting difficult conversations and soul-searching within communities and government institutions alike. The incident sparked a renewed debate over the rights of vulnerable workers, the appropriate limits of federal power, and the balance between state and federal authority. The July 10th raids quickly became a flashpoint, a symbol of the growing tensions and divisions within American society. It ignited passionate debate over civil rights, the principles of state sovereignty, and, most importantly, the profound human cost of policy conflicts, the real-world impact on individuals and families caught in the middle. As the sun began to paint the California sky with hues of orange and pink, a fleet of federal law enforcement vehicles silently descended upon multiple licensed cannabis farms, their presence shattering the morning's tranquility. The arrival of the authorities caught the farm workers completely off guard, their faces etched with surprise and confusion. Almost immediately, agents began detaining employees suspected of being undocumented, leading them away from their workstations. As the detentions unfolded, word of the raid spread rapidly through the community like wildfire, carried by hurried phone calls and urgent whispers. Alarmed and concerned, family members, local residents, and passionate activists quickly gathered near the farms, their numbers swelling with each passing minute. They united to form a peaceful protest, effectively blocking the farm's access roads and creating a human barrier against further action. Protesters chanted slogans of solidarity and justice, held signs bearing messages of support and defiance, and meticulously documented the unfolding scene with their phones and cameras, capturing every moment of the confrontation. They were determined to shield their community and protect its members from what they perceived as unjust federal action. As the crowd grew larger and more emboldened, tensions escalated, with protesters demanding answers and accountability from the authorities. In response, agents clad in riot gear formed defensive lines, creating a stark visual barrier between law enforcement and the increasingly agitated crowd. The standoff stretched on for hours under the relentless California sun, with neither side willing to yield an inch, creating a tense and volatile atmosphere. The protesters remained steadfast, refusing to disperse despite repeated orders from law enforcement, firmly believing that their continued presence was the only thing protecting the detained workers from potential deportation. This tense and prolonged impasse set the stage for a dramatic escalation that would soon spark national outrage and thrust the small farming community into the national spotlight. By afternoon, the standoff reached a breaking point. Federal agents fired tear gas into the crowd, sending clouds of chemical irritant through the air. Panic erupted as protesters, including families and young children, fled the suffocating fumes. Videos of crying, coughing children quickly spread online, fueling public anger. Federal agencies claimed the force was necessary to control a volatile crowd, but critics condemned the action as reckless and inhumane. The use of tear gas against minors became a symbol of federal overreach. Advocacy groups and politicians demanded accountability, arguing that no enforcement action justified such tactics. The incident transformed a local raid into a national civil rights crisis. California's response was immediate and forceful. Governor Newsom condemned the use of chemical agents on children, demanding a federal investigation. State officials and local officials echoed his outrage, framing the raid as a violation of California's values and authority. Advocacy groups mobilized, providing legal aid and calling for accountability. Civil rights organizations argued the raid reflected a broader pattern of aggressive federal enforcement targeting vulnerable communities. Social media erupted with images of affected children, intensifying public pressure on federal agencies. The unified response made clear that California would not tolerate such tactics on its soil. In the aftermath, the focus shifted to accountability and reform. The Department of Justice launched an internal investigation, but advocates demanded an independent review. Civil rights attorneys prepared a class action lawsuit, citing excessive force and violations of constitutional rights, especially concerning the use of tear gas on children. California lawmakers fast-tracked bills to restrict federal raids and require adherence to state use of force standards. The legality of these measures will be contested, but they signal California's resolve to protect its residents. The incident reignited debates over police militarization and the role of federal agencies in local communities. The July 10th raid became a catalyst for legal, legislative, and cultural change. The raid that took place on July 10th, while seemingly isolated, can only be truly understood when placed in the broader context of California's unique and complex intersection of cannabis, labor practices, and immigration policies. The state's legal cannabis industry, a sector that has experienced rapid growth, is now a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, generating significant revenue and economic activity. However, this booming industry relies heavily on immigrant labor to sustain its operations, with much of that workforce being undocumented, creating a vulnerable situation for many. California's sanctuary policies, enacted to provide a degree of protection, aim to shield these workers from federal immigration enforcement, even as federal law criminalizes their presence in the country, creating a direct conflict. The cannabis sector, despite the veneer of legalization and regulation, still operates in legal gray areas, facing challenges related to banking, interstate commerce, and federal oversight. This ambiguous legal landscape leaves workers vulnerable to exploitation, wage theft, and the constant threat of immigration enforcement actions. Federal agencies, often frustrated by what they perceive as state resistance to federal law, have increasingly targeted high-profile industries like cannabis, viewing them as a means to assert federal authority. Therefore, the July 10th raid was not an isolated event, but rather, the culmination and result of long-standing tensions and disagreements over immigration enforcement, evolving drug policy, and the ongoing struggle between state and federal power. For many Californians, particularly those in immigrant communities, the operation was seen as a punitive move, a direct attack against both the state's progressive laws and the well-being of its diverse people. The clash symbolized a broader struggle, a microcosm of the larger debates over fundamental rights, evolving policy, and the very future of California's increasingly diverse communities. The July 10th raid is now a defining moment in the battle over civil rights and state sovereignty. It deepened mistrust between California and federal authorities, setting the stage for ongoing legal and political conflict. The incident accelerated calls for reform, both to protect workers and to limit federal enforcement power in the state. Nationally, it fueled arguments for federal cannabis legalization and police reform, especially regarding the use of force. The images of children affected by tear gas galvanized a broad coalition demanding accountability and change. The raid put a human face on policy debates, highlighting the real-world stakes for families and communities. How California and Washington respond will shape the future of cannabis, immigration, and civil rights in America.